A cry in the shadows. The morning sun crept slowly over the sprawling skyline of East Side, a bustling district in the heart of the city. Among the towering buildings and busy streets, a hidden world thrived, a world invisible to most, filled with people struggling to survive. In a forgotten alley, tucked behind an abandoned grocery store, 12-year-old Jacob and his younger sister Mia shared a makeshift shelter made of old cardboard and tarp. Despite their harsh reality, Jacob had learned to navigate the streets with the precision of a seasoned survivor. His eyes were sharp, his steps light, and his instincts honed from years of evading trouble. "Stay close today, Mia," Jacob said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "There's talk of new patrols around the area." Mia, only 8 but far wiser than her years, nodded. "I will. Promise." The siblings emerged from their shelter into the awakening city. Jacob's best friend, Andre, a wiry boy with a mop of curly hair and an infectious grin, joined them near their usual spot at the bustling market square. "Morning, boss," Andre teased, tossing Jacob an apple he'd swiped from a nearby vendor. "What's the plan?" Jacob smirked, but his gaze was drawn to the towering glass structure across the street. Lexington Tower, home to the ultra-rich Beaumont family. Rumors of their wealth were legendary, yet Jacob had never seen them up close, until now. A sleek black car pulled up, and the rear door opened to reveal Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont, their polished appearances screaming luxury. In Mrs. Beaumont's arms was a baby girl, no older than a year, her soft coos audible even from the boy's hiding spot. "That must be baby Ella," Andrew whispered. "Everyone talks about her. The media loves that kid." But something else caught Jacob's eye. A man, hooded and shrouded in shadow, lingered just beyond the edge of the crowd. His gaze never left the baby. "See him?" Jacob nudged Andrew. Andrew followed Jacob's line of sight and frowned. "Creepy. Should we say something?" Jacob hesitated. They were street kids. No one listened to them, let alone believed them. "They'll just think we're up to no good." They decided to watch, keeping their distance. The hooded man stayed for hours, moving only when the Beaumonts did. Unease twisted in Jacob's gut, but before he could act, the man disappeared into the crowd. That night, Jacob couldn't shake the image of the hooded man. He was too experienced to ignore his instincts, and they screamed that something was wrong. The next morning, chaos erupted across the city. Sirens wailed, and the news was everywhere. Baby Ella had been kidnapped. Jacob's stomach churned. He and Andre met near the market, their usual cheer replaced with dread. "I saw him again," Andre blurted, his voice shaky. "The hooded guy. He was near the abandoned warehouse by the river this morning." Jacob's mind raced. They knew the warehouse well. It was a playground for street kids, a haven of rusted machinery and forgotten corners. "We need to go," Jacob said, urgency sharpening his tone. Andrew hesitated. "Shouldn't we tell the cops?" Jacob shook his head. "They won't listen. We're just kids. If we don't do something, who will?" The warehouse loomed before them, its massive steel doors rusted shut. But Jacob and Andre knew a side entrance, a narrow gap in the wall hidden behind overgrown weeds. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and dampness. They moved carefully, avoiding broken glass and creaking floorboards. It didn't take long to hear it. A baby's cry, faint but unmistakable. Jacob motioned for Andrew to follow. They crept toward the sound, peering through a gap in the crumbling wall. There in the dim light was the hooded man. He paced nervously, muttering under his breath. Baby Ella lay on a blanket nearby, her cries softening as the man rocked her gently. "This guy doesn't seem like a typical kidnapper," Andrew whispered. Jacob nodded. "He's nervous, not cruel. But we need to figure out why he took her." As they watched, the man began to speak aloud, as though confessing to the empty room. "I didn't want it to come to this," he murmured, "but they left me no choice. They took everything from me, my job, my family, my life. And now, they're going to listen. Jacob and Ander exchanged a glance. Whoever this man was, his story ran deeper than they'd imagined. But baby Ella needed help, and time was running out. "We have to get her out of here," Jacob said, determination hardening his voice. Ander nodded. "What's the plan?" "We'll create a distraction. I'll draw him away, and you grab the baby." With their plan set, they steeled themselves for what lay ahead. The stakes were higher than ever, but they were street kids, survivors, and they wouldn't let baby Ella become another tragedy on the streets they called home. The chase for hope. The air inside the warehouse was stifling, the scent of damp wood and rusted metal hanging heavy. Jacob signaled to Ander, pointing toward the far end of the room, where a collection of rusted barrels provided some cover. The baby's cries had quieted now, leaving only the man's tense pacing and muttered words echoing through the cavernous space. "We need to do this fast," Jacob whispered. "Every second we wait is a risk." Ander nodded, his hands shaking slightly. "I'm ready." Jacob stepped into the dim light filtering through a broken skylight, his sneakers scraping softly against the concrete floor. He deliberately kicked a loose piece of metal, letting the clang reverberate across the warehouse. The hooded man's head snapped toward the sound. "Who's there?" he barked, his voice taut with a mix of fear and anger. Jacob raised his hands, palms out. "Just me," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm not here to hurt you." The man's posture stiffened. He reached toward his side, where a crowbar leaned against the wall. "What do you want?" "You don't look like the police." "I'm not," Jacob replied, taking a cautious step forward. I just heard a baby crying. I wanted to make sure she's okay." The man hesitated, his grip on the crowbar loosening slightly. "She's fine. Better than she would be with them." Jacob caught the flicker of pain in the man's eyes and seized the moment. "You don't have to do this," he said, keeping his tone calm. "Whatever they did to you, there's a better way to make them pay." The man let out a bitter laugh. "You think they care? People like the Bowmans don't notice people like me until we make them." Behind the man, Ander edged closer to baby Ella, his movements slow and deliberate. Jacob kept talking, hoping to buy more time. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," Jacob said, his voice low but firm. "To feel like no one sees you, no one cares. But taking her, it's not the answer." The man turned away, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, his guard was down. Ander lunged, scooping up baby Ella in one swift motion. "What are you doing?" the man shouted, spinning around. Jacob reacted instinctively, grabbing a metal rod from the ground and swinging it against a nearby stack of barrels. The deafening crash sent the man stumbling back in shock, giving Ander just enough time to dart toward the side entrance. "Run," Jacob shouted. Ander bolted, clutching the baby tightly as her cries rose again, piercing and frantic. Jacob followed, his heart pounding. Behind them, the man gave chase, his footsteps heavy and unrelenting. Outside, the city's streets were alive with noise, the honking of car horns, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren. Ander sprinted down an alley, Jacob close on his heels. The hooded man was fast, but desperation lent the boys an edge. "Left," Jacob yelled, skidding around a corner. He knew these streets better than anyone, their twists and turns etched into his memory like a survival map. Ander's breath came in gasps, but he didn't slow down. "She's scared," he called over his shoulder, trying to soothe the crying baby. "We need to get her somewhere safe." Jacob's mind raced. They couldn't go back to the warehouse, and the police were out of the question. But there was one place, an old boarded-up community center that no one paid attention to anymore. "This way." Jacob led Ander down a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a person to slip through. The man's shouts grew fainter behind them, his larger frame struggling to navigate the cramped space. At last, they reached the community center. Jacob kicked open a side door they'd pried loose months ago, ushering Andrew inside. The room was dark and musty, but it was safe, for now. "Set her down," Jacob said, collapsing onto the floor. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath. "We need to figure out our next move." Andrew laid baby Ella on a pile of old blankets, trying to calm her. "What if he finds us? He's not going to just give up." Jacob glanced at the door, his jaw tightening. "I know, but we can't stay here forever. We need help." Andrew's eyes widened. "The cops?" "No," Jacob said firmly. "They'll arrest us before they listen to anything we say. But maybe someone else will." The answer came in the form of a flyer Jacob had seen just days ago, taped to a light post near the market. It advertised a new neighborhood initiative, led by a woman named Clara Reynolds, who had a reputation for helping street kids. "She's our best shot," Jacob told Andrew. "If anyone can get people to listen, it's her." Andrew looked skeptical, but didn't argue. "Fine, but how do we get there without him finding us?" Jacob thought for a moment. "We'll split up. I'll lead him away while you take Ella to Clara." Andrew hesitated. "Are you sure?" Jacob nodded. "It's the only way." The plan worked, at first. Jacob emerged from the community center, making sure the hooded man spotted him. He bolted down the street, weaving through crowds and ducking into alleys, keeping just enough distance to stay ahead. Meanwhile, Andrew cradled baby Ella and slipped out through a back exit. He moved quickly but carefully, keeping to side streets and avoiding open spaces. The baby's cries had quieted, and she clung to him with surprising trust. When he finally reached Clara's office, he banged on the door with all his might. "Help, please," he shouted. The door opened, revealing a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a kind face. She took one look at Andrew and the baby in his arms and ushered them inside. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice calm but urgent. As Andrew recounted the events of the past 2 days, Clara's expression shifted from shock to determination. "You did the right thing coming here," she said, "but we need to act fast. The longer this goes on, the more danger Ella is in." She picked up the phone, her fingers flying over the keypad. "I know someone who can help." Across town, Jacob's situation was growing dire. The hooded man was relentless, closing the distance with every passing minute. Jacob's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he pushed forward, refusing to give up. Finally, he spotted a group of construction workers unloading materials near a busy intersection. He darted toward them, weaving between trucks and machinery. The hooded man hesitated, his pursuit faltering. Jacob seized the moment to slip away, disappearing into the chaos. As he caught his breath in a nearby alley, a car pulled up beside him. The door opened, and to his astonishment, Clara stepped out. "Get in," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jacob didn't hesitate. As the car sped away, Clara explained, "Andrew told me everything. You boys are braver than most adults I know." "Is Ella safe?" Jacob asked, his voice shaky. "She's safe," Clara assured him. "And now we're going to make sure this ends the right way." Jacob nodded, relief washing over him. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they would bring baby Ella home and uncover the truth behind the man who had taken her. A broken truth. Jacob sat in the back seat of Clara's car, his body still trembling from the chase. The city streets blurred past him, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. Clara's firm grip on the steering wheel and the focused expression on her face made him feel safer than he had in days. "I've contacted someone who might be able to mediate this," Clara said as they approached a quieter part of town. "But Jacob, you need to tell me everything you know about the man who took Ella." Jacob hesitated. He wasn't sure how much to reveal. "He's not what I expected," he finally admitted. "He's hurt, angry, but he didn't seem like he wanted to harm her." Clara glanced at him in the rearview mirror. That's an important distinction. Did he say why he took her? Jacob nodded. He mentioned something about losing everything. Something about the Beaumonts ruining his life. He kept saying he wanted justice. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. That's what I was afraid of. I've dealt with cases like this before. People pushed to their limits by those with power. But kidnapping isn't justice, no matter the reason. Jacob shifted uncomfortably. He knew Clara was right, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the man's pain was real, his desperation genuine. They arrived at Clara's modest office, a converted storefront with large windows covered in faded posters about community programs and support initiatives. Inside, Andrew was waiting, his face lighting up when he saw Jacob. "You made it," Andrew exclaimed. "Clara's been on the phone nonstop, trying to figure out how to handle this." Jacob's gaze immediately went to baby Ella, who was nestled in a soft blanket on Clara's desk. She was sleeping peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Relief flooded him. "She's okay," he murmured. "For now," Clara said, pulling up a chair. "But we're running out of time. The Beaumonts have offered a massive reward for any information about Ella, and the police are swarming the city. If we don't get ahead of this, things could go very badly for that man, and for both of you." Jacob frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara sighed. "Street kids like you don't exactly have the system on your side. If the police find out you were involved, they might not care about your intentions. They'll just see two boys who were part of a kidnapping." Andrew paled. "But we're trying to help." "I know that," Clara said gently. "But the world doesn't always see things as they are. That's why we need to handle this carefully." As they strategized, Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression darkened. "It's from a contact in the police department," she said. "They've identified the kidnapper, Daniel Rivera." Jacob's ears perked up. "Who is he?" Clara tapped her desk thoughtfully. "Rivera used to be an environmental engineer. He worked for one of the Beaumont subsidiaries about 7 years ago. From what I remember, he uncovered some illegal activity, waste dumping into the city's river system." Andrew frowned. "That doesn't sound like a crime. Isn't that the kind of thing he's supposed to report?" Clara nodded. "It is. But whistleblowers often face retaliation, especially when powerful people are involved. Rivera accused the company of covering up the dumping, but the Beaumonts claimed he was lying. He was fired and later accused of sabotage. The case didn't go public for long. It was swept under the rug." Jacob's stomach churned. So he was telling the truth. He wasn't some crazy guy. They really ruined his life. Clara leaned back in her chair. "It's possible. But taking Ella wasn't the right way to fight back. That's where he crossed a line." Jacob stood abruptly, pacing the room. "We have to talk to him. He needs to know Ella is safe. Maybe if we tell him we're on his side, we can stop this before it gets worse." Clara hesitated. "It's risky. He's unstable and might not trust anyone." "I think he'll trust us," Jacob said firmly. "Andrew and I talked to him before. He didn't hurt us. He even cared about Ella when she started crying. He's not a bad person." After a long pause, Clara nodded. "All right. But if we're going to do this, we need to be smart. I'll reach out to a mediator I know, a lawyer who specializes in whistleblower cases. Maybe we can use this to negotiate a peaceful resolution." An hour later, they were back on the streets, heading toward the warehouse. Clara had contacted the mediator, who agreed to meet them there. As they approached, Jacob's heart raced. He didn't know if Daniel would still be there, or if he'd fled after the earlier encounter. The warehouse was quiet, its shadow stretching long in the fading light. Clara stayed back, letting Jacob and Andrew take the lead. They slipped through the same side entrance, the air inside cooler and stiller than before. "Daniel," Jacob called softly. "It's us. We need to talk." For a moment, there was no response. Then, from the far corner, a figure emerged. Daniel looked even more disheveled than before, his eyes hollow and his posture defeated. "You came back," he said, his voice hoarse. Jacob nodded. "Ella's safe. She's with Clara, the woman who's helping us. But we need to end this. The police are everywhere, and they'll come down hard on you if they find you." Daniel sagged against a wall. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted them to listen, to see what they've done." Andrew stepped forward. "They will. Clara's got a lawyer, a mediator, who wants to help you tell your story. But you have to trust us." Daniel's gaze flicked between the two boys, his expression a mix of hope and despair. "I've been fighting for so long," he murmured. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." Jacob stepped closer, his voice steady. "You trusted us enough to let us take Ella's medicine. Trust us now to help you make this right." After a tense silence, Daniel finally nodded. "All right. I'll talk to this mediator. But if they betray me—" "They won't," Clara said, stepping into the room. "You've got more allies than you think, Daniel. People are starting to see the cracks in the Beaumont story. If you're willing to tell the truth, we can make them answer for what they've done." Daniel straightened, some of the weight lifting from his shoulders. "Okay, let's do this." As the group prepared to leave the warehouse, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something monumental. This wasn't just about Ella anymore. It was about exposing a truth that had been buried for too long. And Jacob was determined to see it through. The threads of justice. The drive to the mediator's office was tense, the air thick with unspoken fears. Daniel sat in the back seat of Clara's car, staring out the window as the city rushed past. Jacob and Andrew sat on either side of him, their youthful energy muted by the gravity of what they were about to do. Clara, in the driver's seat, glanced at Daniel in the rearview mirror. "You're making the right choice," she said gently. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about everyone who's been hurt by the Beaumont's actions." Daniel didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "Do you know what it's like to lose everything? To watch your family suffer while the people who wronged you continue living their perfect lives?" Clara nodded, her eyes softening. "I've seen it, and I've seen people like you, people brave enough to stand up and fight back. That's what you're doing now." Jacob, sitting to Daniel's right, spoke up. "We've got your back, Daniel. You're not alone in this." Daniel looked at the boy, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said, the words barely audible. They arrived at the mediator's office, a modest building tucked away on a quiet street. The mediator, a woman named Evelyn Carter, greeted them with a firm handshake and a warm smile. She had a commanding presence, her sharp eyes and confident demeanor exuding competence. "Mr. Rivera," Evelyn said, gesturing for everyone to sit. "Clara filled me in on your situation. I've reviewed what little public information there is about your case, and I believe we can build a strong argument if we act quickly." Daniel's hands tightened into fists. "They destroyed my life," he said. "They dumped toxic chemicals into the river, covered it up, and pinned the blame on me when I tried to expose them. My daughter, she got sick because of that water. She was only 4 when we lost her." Evelyn leaned forward, her expression softening. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, but if we're going to take them on, we need evidence. Do you still have the proof you collected?" Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "I hid copies of everything before they raided my apartment. It's all in a storage locker downtown." Evelyn's eyes lit up with determination. "Good. We'll retrieve it and use it to build our case. But this won't be easy. The Beaumonts have resources, influence, and lawyers who will try to bury this before it gains traction." Jacob chimed in, his voice steady. "We're not afraid of them. We've already come this far." Evelyn smiled at the boy's courage. "Good, because this fight is going to need every ounce of bravery we can muster." That evening, the group made their way to the storage facility where Daniel had hidden his evidence. The locker was tucked in a quiet corner of the sprawling facility, its metal door scratched and weathered. Daniel's hands trembled as he unlocked it, the weight of years of pain and injustice pressing down on him. Inside, they found a stack of boxes filled with documents, photographs, and even samples of contaminated water from the river. Evelyn carefully examined the contents, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. "This is damning," she said, holding up a document bearing the Beaumont Industries logo. "These records show a clear pattern of illegal dumping. If we can verify this, it's enough to launch a full investigation." Daniel's face was a mix of relief and anguish. "It's more than just proof," he said, pointing to a faded photograph of his daughter. "It's my daughter's life. Her memory." Clara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll make sure her story is heard, Daniel. I promise." The next step was finding a way to present the evidence without alerting the Beaumonts. Evelyn suggested using the media as a shield, reasoning that public attention would make it harder for the powerful family to suppress the story. "We'll need to find a journalist who's willing to take the risk," Evelyn said. "Someone with integrity and a platform big enough to make an impact." Clara nodded. "I know just the person. Her name is Mia Torres. She's known for her investigative reporting and her refusal to back down from a challenge." Jacob and Ander exchanged a glance, their excitement growing. "What about us?" Jacob asked. "How can we help?" Evelyn smiled. "You've already done so much. But if you're willing, your first-hand accounts of what happened could add a powerful layer to this story." Ander grinned. "We're in." Later that night, they met Mia Torres at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. The journalist was a fiery woman in her early 30s, her piercing gaze giving the impression that nothing escaped her notice. "This is big," Mia said after reviewing the documents. "If this story breaks, it could bring the Beaumonts to their knees." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "And what happens to Ella? They'll come after me for taking her." Mia shook her head. "The evidence will overshadow everything else. And if we frame this as an act of desperation, a father seeking justice for his daughter, it might even garner sympathy." Clara nodded. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." The following morning, the city awoke to a storm. Headlines blared across newspapers and television screens. "Whistleblowers' evidence exposes Beaumont Industries' environmental crimes, and father's fight for justice reveals dark secrets of billionaire family." Mia's report was thorough, detailing the illegal dumping, the cover-up, and the retaliation against Daniel. She included excerpts from interviews with Jacob and Andre, painting a vivid picture of the lengths they had gone to protect Ella and uncover the truth. The response was immediate. Protests erupted outside Beaumont Tower, demanding accountability. Social media lit up with calls for justice, and environmental groups rallied behind Daniel's cause. But the Beaumonts weren't going down without a fight. Their lawyers issued statements denying the allegations and accusing Daniel of fabricating the evidence. "They're scared," Evelyn said, watching the news coverage. "They wouldn't be so defensive if they didn't know the truth was on our side." As the pressure mounted, a surprising development occurred. Thomas Beaumont himself reached out to Clara, requesting a meeting. "He's trying to control the narrative," Evelyn warned. "But this could also be an opportunity to negotiate." Daniel hesitated. "What if it's a trap?" Clara looked at him, her gaze steady. "Then we'll face it together. But if there's a chance to secure justice without dragging this out, we have to try." The meeting was set for the next day, at a neutral location, a public community center surrounded by media and protesters. Jacob and Ander insisted on coming along, their resolve unshaken. When Thomas Beaumont arrived, flanked by his lawyers, he looked every bit the polished billionaire. But there was a flicker of unease in his eyes, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. "I want to resolve this," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "For my family and for the city." Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Then admit what you've done. Take responsibility for the lives you've destroyed." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Finally, Thomas sighed. "If I do this, it's the end of everything I've built. It's the beginning of something better," Clara said firmly. "A chance to make things right." Thomas looked at Daniel, then at the boys, and for the first time, his polished exterior cracked. "I'll confess," he said, "but on one condition. Ella stays out of this. She's innocent." Daniel nodded. "Agreed. She's always been innocent." The confession rocked the city. Thomas Beaumont admitted to the crimes, implicating others in his company and pledging to cooperate with authorities. The fallout was immense, but for Daniel, it was a long-awaited victory. Jacob and Andrew watched the news that night with Clara, their hearts swelling with pride. They had helped change the course of countless lives, and for the first time, they felt truly seen. And somewhere in the city, baby Ella slept peacefully, her future brighter because of the courage of a few unlikely heroes. Redemption and reckoning. The days following Thomas Beaumont's confession were a whirlwind of media frenzy, legal action, and public outrage. For the first time in years, Daniel Rivera felt a glimmer of hope. The truth he had fought so hard to reveal was finally in the open, and the Beaumonts were being held accountable. But the road ahead was far from smooth. The fallout begins. Daniel sat in Clara's office, his fingers nervously tapping the edge of his chair. Across the room, Evelyn Carter reviewed the latest updates on her laptop, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and focus. "The confession has set off a chain reaction," Evelyn said, glancing up. "Regulators are investigating Beaumont Industries, environmental groups are suing for damages, and former employees are coming forward with similar stories of retaliation." "That's good, right?" Daniel asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's more than good. It's monumental," Evelyn replied. "But it's also dangerous. People like the Beaumonts don't go down without a fight. They still have allies, and they'll use every resource they have to protect themselves." Daniel nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his daughter's memory, for the city, and for the boys who had risked everything to help him. Jacob and Andrew's new reality. Meanwhile, Jacob and Andrew were adjusting to their new roles as unlikely heroes. Their lives had transformed overnight. Gone were the days of blending into the background, invisible and overlooked. Now, reporters sought them out, community members offered them praise, and even local authorities treated them with newfound respect. But the attention wasn't all positive. "People are saying we only did it for the reward money," Andrew grumbled one afternoon as they sat outside the community center. Jacob shrugged, tossing a pebble across the pavement. "Let them talk. We know the truth." "I don't care about the money," Andrew continued, his voice rising. "I care that we helped save Ella and expose what those people did." Jacob smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." Clara joined them, holding a folder filled with documents. "You two have done more for this city in the past few days than most people do in a lifetime," she said, sitting down beside them. "But there's one more thing I need your help with." Jacob perked up. "What is it?" "We're organizing a rally," Clara explained, "to push for stronger environmental protections and better support for whistleblowers. It's going to be big, and I want you both to speak." Andrew's eyes widened. "Us? Speak? In front of people?" Clara nodded. "You've lived through the worst of this city's neglect, and you've shown what courage looks like. People need to hear your story." Jacob hesitated, his mind racing. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but he knew this was important. "We'll do it," he said finally, nudging Andrew. "Right?" Andrew groaned but nodded. "Fine. But don't blame me if I mess up." The rally for justice. The day of the rally dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant blue. Hundreds of people gathered in front of City Hall, carrying signs that read "Justice for All" and "Protect Our Planet." The energy in the air was electric, a mix of anger, hope, and determination. Jacob and Andrew stood backstage, their nerves palpable. Clara gave them a reassuring smile. "You've got this," she said. "Just speak from the heart." The boys watched as Daniel stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding yet humble. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing across the square. "Thank you," Daniel began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Thank you for standing with us, in this fight for truth and justice." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. 7 years ago, I lost everything because I dared to speak out against corruption. My daughter, Elena, paid the ultimate price for my courage. But today, I stand here not as a victim, but as a survivor. The crowd erupted again, their cheers growing louder. Daniel continued, his voice rising with conviction. "This isn't just about me or my family. It's about every person who has been silenced, every community that has suffered because of greed and neglect. We must demand accountability, not just from the Bowmans, but from every institution that allows these injustices to happen." As Daniel stepped back, Jacob and Ander exchanged a glance. It was their turn. The boys speak. Jacob approached the microphone, his heart pounding. The sea of faces before him blurred together, but he focused on a single thought. They need to hear this. "My name is Jacob," he began, his voice wavering but growing stronger with each word. "I'm just a kid from the streets. Most of my life, people have looked right past me, like I don't exist. But that changed when I saw something I couldn't ignore." He took a deep breath, glancing at Ander for support. "When baby Ella was taken, we could have walked away. It would have been easier, safer. But we didn't, because we knew it was the right thing to do." Ander stepped up, his usual bravado replaced by raw honesty. "We've seen how this city treats people like us, people who don't have money or power. But we also know that change is possible. We saw it when we helped save Ella. We're seeing it now, with all of you here." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers filling the boys with a sense of purpose they had never felt before. The Bowmans' reckoning. While the rally brought hope and unity, the legal battle against the Bowmans raged on. Thomas Beaumont's confession had opened the floodgates, and investigators uncovered a web of corruption that went deeper than anyone had imagined. Court hearings became daily headlines, each new revelation adding fuel to the public's outrage. Whistleblowers from other industries came forward, inspired by Daniel's courage, and the movement for accountability gained unstoppable momentum. For Daniel, the victory was bittersweet. "It won't bring Elena back," he said to Clara one evening, "but it feels like her death wasn't in vain." Clara nodded. "Her memory is a catalyst for change, Daniel. And that's a legacy no one can take away." A city transformed. Months later, the city looked different, less divided, more hopeful. Programs for homeless youth were expanded, environmental regulations were strengthened, and the Beaumont Industries logo was replaced on skyscrapers, with new names representing transparency and progress. Jacob and Ander became local icons, their story immortalized in murals and community projects. But to them, the greatest reward was seeing the tangible changes in their neighborhood: clean water, safe housing, and opportunities for kids like them to dream beyond survival. As Jacob walked through the bustling market square one sunny afternoon, he spotted a group of younger kids playing near a fountain. They looked up at him with wide-eyed admiration. "Hey, you're the guy from the news," one of them exclaimed. Jacob smiled, kneeling to their level. "I'm just a kid like you," he said. "But you know what? You can make a difference too. All it takes is courage and a little help from the right people." That evening, Jacob, Ander, and Daniel gathered at Clara's office to celebrate. The walls were adorned with photos and news clippings from the past few months, each one a testament to their journey. "To new beginnings," Clara said, raising a glass of sparkling cider. "To justice," Daniel added. "To being seen," Jacob said with a grin. The room erupted into laughter and cheers, a moment of joy in a story that had been fraught with pain and struggle. But as they celebrated, they knew their work wasn't over. The fight for justice was ongoing, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. A new dawn. The celebration at Clara's office wound down as the night deepened, but the warmth of victory lingered in the air. Daniel sat by the window, looking out at the city that had once seemed so hostile. Now it felt different. There was a sense of hope, a crack in the walls that had long separated the powerful from the powerless. Jacob joined him, holding a plate of leftover cake. "You okay?" the boy asked, his voice quiet. Daniel nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." Jacob smiled. "Feels weird, doesn't it? People finally listening to us." Daniel chuckled softly. "Yeah, but you earned it. You and Andrew. You too remind me of who I was before all of this. Brave, determined, willing to fight for what's right." Jacob tilted his head. "You're still that person, Daniel. You just needed someone to see it." Daniel's eyes glistened as he reached out to tussle the boy's hair. "You're wise beyond your years, kid." The next steps. As the days turned into weeks, the ripple effects of their actions continued to grow. The city council announced a sweeping initiative to address homelessness, using funds seized from the Beaumont's assets. The new programs included job training, health care, and affordable housing, a lifeline for countless families. Hope Haven, the shelter Daniel and Clara had proposed, was fast-tracked for construction. Clara had been asked to oversee the project, and she insisted on involving Jacob, Andrew, and Daniel in its design. Who better to help shape it than the people who know what it's like to need it? Clara said during one of their planning meetings. Andrew grinned. "Does that mean we get to pick the paint colors?" Clara laughed. "Within reason. A personal resolution." For Daniel, the public reckoning was only part of the journey. One evening, he sat at his small apartment, a stack of old photographs spread across the table. Pictures of his daughter, Elena, smiled back at him, a reminder of what he had lost and what had driven him to fight. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he found a young woman standing there, holding a small potted plant. Her face was unfamiliar, but her eyes were kind. "Mr. Rivera?" she asked. "That's me," Daniel replied cautiously. "I'm Sarah," she said. "My father used to work at Beaumont Industries. He passed away last year, but before he did, he told me about what happened to you. He always said you were a hero for standing up to them." Daniel was stunned into silence. Sarah extended the plant toward him. "He wanted me to find you. He said you'd understand. This is a cutting from the tree outside the old factory. The one you used to talk about during breaks." Daniel took the plant, his hands trembling. The gesture, small as it was, felt like a bridge to the life he had lost. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more than you know. A community united." The rally had sparked more than just political change. It had brought people together in ways Daniel, Jacob, and Andrew could never have anticipated. Former workers from Beaumont Industries formed support groups, advocating for ethical business practices. Community centers began hosting workshops on whistleblower protections and environmental awareness. At the heart of it all was Hope Haven, a symbol of resilience and renewal. When the shelter finally opened its doors, it was a day of celebration. Jacob and Andrew helped cut the ribbon, their faces beaming with pride. Daniel, now a key figure in the project, gave a heartfelt speech about the power of standing together against injustice. As the first families moved into their new homes, laughter and the sound of children playing filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence and despair that had once haunted the city's forgotten corners. A bright future. Months later, Jacob and Andrew stood on the rooftop garden of Hope Haven, overlooking the city. The space, once barren and neglected, was now alive with flowers, vegetables, and even a small fountain. It had become a sanctuary for residents and a favorite spot for the two boys. "Can you believe this used to be a place we'd sneak into for shelter?" Andrew asked, leaning against the railing. Jacob shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "No, but it feels good knowing we helped make it something better." Andrew grinned. "Think they'll name a building after us someday?" Jacob laughed. "Maybe, but I'd settle for knowing we made a difference." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. The city lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the streets that had once felt so cold. In that moment, they knew their story wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. And though their journey had been filled with hardship, it had also forged bonds and ignited change that would ripple far beyond their corner of the world. For the first time in their lives, Jacob and Andrew felt something they had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The legacy of courage. The city was a different place now. Months after the rally, the fallout from the Beaumont's downfall continued to ripple through every layer of society. For years, their name had symbolized power and philanthropy. Now, it was a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most powerful could be held accountable. Jacob and Andrew had become symbols of that accountability. The two boys, once invisible to society, were now heroes in their community. But they didn't let the newfound attention change who they were. For them, it was never about recognition. It was about doing the right thing, even when no one else would. A visit to the past. One brisk autumn morning, Jacob stood in the alley where it had all begun, his breath visible in the crisp air. The remnants of their old shelter were still there, a tattered piece of tarp, a few broken crates. But the space felt different now, cleaner, safer. Andrew appeared behind him, carrying 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate. "Figured you'd be here," he said, handing one to Jacob. Jacob smiled. "Just wanted to see it one last time." Andrew nodded, his gaze sweeping the alley. "Feels weird, doesn't it? Like it's part of someone else's life." "Yeah," Jacob said, taking a sip of his drink. "But we can't forget where we came from." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared past settling over them. Then Andrew grinned. "You know what's funny? We used to think surviving another day was a big win. Now we're talking about college scholarships and community projects." Jacob laughed. "Yeah, life's full of surprises." A new chapter for Daniel. Daniel Rivera was thriving in ways he hadn't thought possible. Hope Haven had become more than a shelter. It was a hub for transformation. Under Daniel's leadership, the foundation expanded its reach, partnering with other organizations to address systemic issues like poverty, environmental justice, and education. But Daniel's most significant victory came in a more personal form. One evening, as he worked late in his office, a knock at the door startled him. When he opened it, he found Thomas Beaumont standing there, looking uncharacteristically humble. "Mr. Rivera," Thomas began, his voice tentative. "May I come in?" Daniel hesitated but stepped aside, gesturing for the man to enter. Thomas sat across from him, his hands fidgeting nervously. "I've been thinking about everything," Thomas said, "about what I did to you, to your family, to so many others. No apology can ever undo the damage, but I need you to know, I'm sorry." Daniel studied the man, his emotions a complicated mix of anger, sadness, and unexpected empathy. "Why now?" he asked. Thomas sighed. "Because I've lost everything, too. My wealth, my reputation, none of it means anything anymore. And for the first time in my life, I'm starting to understand what I put you through." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "You took my daughter from me, Mr. Beaumont. Nothing will ever make that right." Thomas nodded, his expression heavy with regret. "I know, but I want to help you honor her memory. I've been volunteering at a youth center downtown, and I see now what I missed all those years. If there's anything I can do for Hope Haven, for the families here, I'm willing." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "If you're serious, we'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The community grows. As Hope Haven flourished, so did the community around it. The building became a beacon of hope, its rooftop garden a gathering place for residents. Clara continued to oversee operations, her leadership a steady force in the ever-evolving project. Jacob and Andrew were regular fixtures at Hope Haven, tutoring younger kids and organizing activities. They had even started a mentorship program, sharing their experiences to inspire others. One afternoon, as they worked on a mural in the building's main hallway, a familiar voice called out to them. Hey, heroes. They turned to see Maya Torres, the journalist who had helped bring their story to light. She held a camera and a notepad, her signature smile as sharp as ever. "Don't tell me you are still running from reporters," Maya teased. Jacob rolled his eyes playfully. "Only the nosy ones." Mia laughed, then grew serious. "I wanted to check in on you too. The story's still making waves, and people are curious about what's next for you." Andrew smirked. "Next, we're going to take over the world." Jacob nudged him. "What he means is, we're focused on the kids here, making sure they don't have to go through what we did." Mia nodded, jotting down notes. "That's a story worth telling. A promise for the future." 1 year after the rally, Hope Haven held a celebration to mark its anniversary. The event drew hundreds of people, from former residents to city officials, all eager to celebrate the progress made. Daniel stood at the podium, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "Hope Haven is more than a building. It's a promise that we will never again allow injustice to go unseen or unchallenged." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing across the courtyard. Jacob and Andrew watched from the sidelines, their faces lit with pride. For them, the event wasn't just a celebration of the past year. It was a reminder of how far they had come. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city, Jacob turned to Andrew. "Think we've done enough?" Andrew grinned. "Not even close. A legacy that lasts." In the years that followed, Hope Haven became the centerpiece of the citywide movement. New shelters and community centers sprang up, inspired by its success. Environmental reforms were implemented, and whistleblower protections were strengthened, ensuring that people like Daniel would never again be silenced. For Jacob and Andrew, the journey was just beginning. They pursued education with the same determination they had shown on the streets, using their knowledge to continue the fight for justice. Daniel became a mentor to both of them, guiding them as they grew into young leaders. And while their paths took them to new places, they never forgot their roots. They often returned to Hope Haven, sharing their story with anyone who would listen. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Jacob would say during his talks. "But if a couple of street kids can take on the Beaumonts, imagine what we can do together." Hope Haven's walls bore witness to countless stories of struggle, triumph, and the unyielding power of courage. And as the years went by, it became clear that the legacy of Jacob, Andrew, Daniel, and Clara was one that would endure for generations to come. The invisible had become seen, the silenced had found their voices, and a city once divided had come together to build a brighter future.